with a video of myself, just so that you guys can see who is the person behind the voice. So my name is Matodonke Mpecha, and I'll be assisting you guys with tax. All right. So in the interest of bandwidth, what I will do is that I will switch off the camera. So we'll then go through the session without me appearing on video, but of course I will be sharing my screen and going through the different discussion points based on what I'm sharing on my screen. Okay, let's then look at the question. So mine is a bit of a simple one in that I need to look at task F. But before we then get to task F, which is document 7, we work through document 7. Before we get to document 7, what I would like us to first do is just to go through the background information, just to ensure that we understand what is some of the information that will become useful to us at a later stage. But of course, the background information sets the scene for the type of entity that we are dealing with. It does assist us in determining what, for example, constitutes income in a business, what constitutes an expense in a business. So it does assist with a lot of decision making throughout the scenario, right? So I'll then start off reading off in the background, and of course I'll note certain things that I think are quite important for us as we're going through the background information and when we get to document number 7. So this is the email from Susan to yourself. So hi there, welcome on your first day at Limpros. We just call it Limpros internally. We are very excited to have you join the finance team. You will be reporting to me and will act as my right hand within the finance team. I will ask you to compile budgets, assist in the preparation of annual financial statements, advise on strategic initiatives, and consider funding options. Now, from a tax perspective, if I were to stop there, that's quite important because when compiling budgets, there are tax implications that you need to think about. You need to give input in terms of what would be the tax budget. There are provisional taxes that are paid. So you then need to also give input to then say what would be the provisional taxes that will be paid or the cash taxes that will be paid as part of the numbers that are produced in the budgeting process. Similarly, in the preparation of financial statements, there is a lot that goes into that as part of tax, and therefore, as a person that is joined, you need to think about the tax implications when it comes to the rest of the financial statements and what would be your input to those financial statements. Yes, it might look like it's only one line, for example, in the income statement where it says tax expense, but remember your tax expense is then broken down into current tax and deferred tax, and we should think about, okay, what are the things that make up that current tax number? What are the things that make up the deferred tax number? Think about the disclosure that is required in terms of IAS 12 when it comes to taxes, when you're looking at the annual financial statements. Then the advice that you then need to provide on strategic initiatives, there might be certain projects that the company wants to undertake. They need to think about what could be the tax implications for those initiatives. What are the tax saving opportunities that might be available as a result of those initiatives that the company is undertaking? So these are some of the things that we need to research and provide advice on them. Then the last one is the consider the funding options. Okay. What would be the tax implications for different funding options? For example, if you're looking at getting additional equity into the business to fund projects, or you're looking at getting debt to fund projects. So how does that impact the tax implications for the company? Right. Then continue reading. Limpros was founded in 1985 and is today a significant player in the private school market in South Africa. The group also has various tertiary education brands. Today, we have 25 schools operating across South Africa and more than 8,200 enrolled learners. The schools include pre-primary, primary and high schools. These schools are branded as either Limpros or Meta. The tertiary division has 11 different campuses delivering various post-high school certificate and diploma programs in fields such as digital marketing, brand management, project management, hospitality and service management, public sector management, and data science. Many of these courses are accredited by the South African Department of Higher Education and Training. 2020 was a tough year for most, and we were not spared the consequences of COVID-19 lockdowns. It was difficult to navigate through the stop-start of school and campus closures and reopenings. Fortunately, we were able to move rapidly to online learning. Although this is not a strength of Limpros yet, certain operations, such as our pre-primary schools, were not able to operate online during lockdowns. Things improved in 2021 as we all learned how to live with lockdowns. So now for me, just one thing I want to highlight is that there were certain concessions that were published, to try and alleviate the impact of COVID on businesses. So now, from your perspective, you then have to research what concessions were published and how would they impact a business from a tax perspective, because National Treasury did publish that. So as part of the research that you need to do, you need to look at those, because potentially those might have an impact on the company if maybe there are strategic initiatives that they want to undertake. The other thing to then think of is that when it comes to the pre-primary schools, they were not able to operate online. So the students were not able to come onto campus, and they were not able to operate online, which means that part of the operation effectively did close down during the lockdown. Now the question then becomes, were the students continuing to pay school fees? Okay, so, and then why do I ask that question? Because then we need to think about the definition of trade, and then say, seeing that because of lockdown, they were not able to continue with business as normal for the pre-primary. Did they continue with a trade? Okay, because then the other thing to remember is that, of course, to get a deduction of the expenditure that they were incurring, okay, that expenditure must be incurred for the purposes of trade, and it must be incurred in the production of income. So those two questions are things that we need to look at and go back to case law and see what is defined as a trade, and when do you continue a trade and when do you discontinue a trade. And of course, looking at, did they generate income at that point in time, and was that and would the expenses incurred at that point in time be in the production of income? So that's something to think of. But of course, do the research and reflect on that and how that is then impacted by what happened over here. If I then continue reading, it then says, I have attached some PowerPoint slides that outline our vision and strategy, as well as some operational and financial information. We use these slides for orientation purposes for new staff members and non-executive directors. They are also useful. These are also useful for planning purposes and biannual strategy sessions. Enjoy the reads. The read, kind regards, Susan. All right, so that is the background information that sets out the scene for us in terms of what type of business we are dealing with. What are some of the things that we are likely to encounter based on the nature of the business? What are some of the circumstances that have impacted this business over a period of time that might, of course, have an implication on taxes going forward? And that's just reflections of things that we'll have to think about, research on, and ensure that when you then get the information on the day, you have covered these points as part of your research. Now let's then go on to document number 7. Okay, so document 7 is an email that came from the CFO to Senior Financial Assistant, which is yourself, and it's titled Tax Matters. So she writes, hi there, it's me again. As you might have heard, our tax manager, Suresh Naidu, recently resigned, and we are still in the process of appointing someone to this position. In the interim, I would really appreciate it if you could assist me with some urgent tax technical and tax administration matters. So I'm going to stop there for now. Now, there are two things that you're going to have to think about when it comes to this scenario. You've been asked to assist with tax technical. Yeah, so as a person who's now going to be providing advice in this business, that's something that you need to be on the lookout for. So what is meant by tax technical is really delving deep into the different tax acts that give rise to the tax implications for different transactions. And the question also says that, or the email says that you're going to have to talk about the tax administration matters as well. Yeah. So don't just think about the tax technical matters, but also go out and do research on tax technical matters, because then you will be at some point required to give advice on those as well. So Tax Administration Act is equally as important as, for example, looking at the Income Tax Act or the VAT Act or Estate Duty or Transfer Duty Act and so forth. Okay, so two things that are quite important to become accountable. And you then have to look at, from an administration perspective, from tax administration perspective, what are the provisions that are likely to be linked to the scenario that we're dealing with. Okay, then we then continue reading. I'm sure your knowledge from university days will be sufficient to assist me with this matter. I don't want Limpros to miss any deadlines and incur any additional costs. Right. Again, that last sentence is telling, in that they don't want to incur any additional costs. They don't want to miss any deadlines. So again, it talks to the administration of the different taxes. Okay. So having a good understanding of what deadlines need to be met by this type of company. You know, from a VAT perspective, when do they need to submit their VAT returns? From an income tax perspective, when do they need to submit their income tax returns? And then look at all the other different taxes to see if they are indeed impacted by the transactions undertaken by Limpros. To ensure, one, you're comfortable with the deadlines, and two, what are some of the things that you need to do to ensure that we do not incur penalties? Okay, because remember, penalties are not necessarily just incurred because maybe you've made a late payment, but penalties could be incurred because you've done the incorrect calculation. Okay. Then if you then continue, the imposition of COVID-19 lockdowns has impacted on the ability of some of the parents and students to settle tuition fees. As you saw in the extract of the annual financial statements in the PowerPoint slides, our bad debts increased significantly in FY21, and our allowances for credit losses in accordance with IFRS 9 is understandably higher than in previous years. Okay, so now if we try and analyze that paragraph, so there are two things that for me that I'm picking up. Well, before I talk about those two things, let's first start off here. You've got customers that are under pressure. And these customers, of course, settle their fees on a credit basis. Okay. Now, with a customer that is settling their fees on credit basis, those fees ultimately do form part of the gross income of Limpros, because that is their income. Now, having said that we've got fees that are classified as gross income and income as well, because they don't get any exemptions. We then look and say, okay, fine. In an instance where we've got bad debts now, which is here, bad debts, you then have to think about it from an accounting perspective. What does it mean? You know, it means this is an expense that is processed through the income statement and ultimately flows through to the profit that a business has made in the year. Now, how does that then have an impact from a tax perspective where an amount has actually been written off? Over and above that, what is the administration that you need to think about when it comes to bad debts? You know, you're going to claim a bad debt. Then the question would be, if, for example, SARS is going to request from you supporting documents for those bad debts, what is it that you will need to provide to them? You know, so you need to think about what supporting documents or what evidence can you put together to substantiate to the tax authorities that indeed I did have bad debts. Okay, so something to research. And of course, the other one is to then look at the allowance for credit losses. So you've raised an allowance for credit losses. Now, from a tax perspective, when you choose the light. Okay. So what tax implications would then arise as a result of allowances for credit losses? Now, these credit losses are raised in terms of IFRS 9. And of course, from a tax perspective, you then have a Section 11J that would look at allowances for credit losses and say you will qualify for a certain allowance based on whatever information that you've supplied. So you need to look at Section 11J and see from Section 11J perspective which part of that section is then relevant to the info that is given to us over here. Right. So over and above just thinking about the tax implications for the bad debts and for the allowance for credit losses, what we also need to think about is when we are disclosing these matters to tax authorities, now in the ITR 14, where are these things going to sit? Okay, so in the ITR 14, where are you going to disclose these two items? Okay, so in actual fact, it will be 4 items. So where will you disclose the bad debts in the ITR 14? Where will you disclose the allowance for credit losses in the ITR 14? Where would you disclose the deduction that you can potentially claim on bad debts? Where would you disclose the deduction that you could claim on allowance for credit losses? Okay, so you need to think about those in the perspective of the ITR 14 and see how you then complete an ITR 14 in relation to these items. Then if we then continue reading, it then says, I know that before he left, Suresh was considering the relevant tax provisions and engaging with our tax advisors to find out if there is additional relief available to us in relation to this increase in bad debts and loss provision for our 2021 financial year. If I remember correctly, he was also working on a request to SARS regarding this potential additional relief. However, I never got feedback from him on this before he left. I would therefore appreciate it if you could perhaps assist me with this. I will also try to have a look at the handover file and documents that Suresh prepared before he left to see if there is anything relating this document there. Have a fantastic weekend. Right. Now, from that last paragraph, I think what I just want to highlight is the fact that they are looking at the relevant tax provisions and engaging tax advisors to try and see if they can't get any additional relief. So now you then need to look and say, okay, fine, how do we now maximize what is available to us? How do we maximize, for example, bad debts? Are there any provisions that would help us to maximize the bad debts? Are there any provisions that would assist us to maximize the allowances of credit losses? Okay. How do we maximize the allowances of credit losses? Because remember that you've got different levels of allowances that you can claim under Section 11J. So now how do you maximize what is available to you in terms of, for example, Section 11J? Earlier on in the background information, we're talking about the implications of COVID and what was published to try and address the implications of COVID on businesses. So now how do we then maximize as well those concessions that were published as part of alleviating the impact of COVID-19? So these are the things that we need to think about. We need to go out and research so that when we then get the information on the day, we are then able to respond adequately to that information that is given to us on the day. Right. So that is where we're going to end our reflections video. I hope this does add value to you guys and you're able to understand, and it does give you good guidance on the direction that you need to take. Thank you.